So in continuing my project, I want to look at my layers, and I've cropped it down to give myself a more efficient use of the memory in Photoshop. And now I can also get rid of elements I know I'm not going to use. I decided against these feet. I don't need these smart layers anymore. I'm not going to try to make his foot walking towards us. But I do want the belly. I do want the head. I want those arms. I don't need the rest. So I'm cleaning it up for efficiency's sake. Remember, I have all those original references in a folder if I should ever need them. Okay, now I need to go through, and I've adjusted the color, and I've played with kind of how these things seam together, but now I want to go through and seam all the internal edges. And so mostly the arms work with the belly, works with the back, works with the tail. I think I can play with the color a little bit more, but now I need to seam the bottom of the head here with the rest of the body. So the head is in multiple components, and that's why I have it in its own group, so I can move it and transform it all together. I can get rid of the smart layers in there. And then you'll see there's different elements that need to be erased from. So I'm going to start with the pig snout there. And the first thing we do, of course, is know what layer we're working on. And instead of doing the magic wand, which will select a lot of things that I might not be able to see all at once, I'm just going to go right to my lasso, and I'm going to go a little bit outside, err on the side of going not close enough to the edge. And you can do it in pieces if you like that. Then I'm going to use Refine Edge to grow that selection a little bit, especially because this is fur and skin. I'm going to have it remember my settings where I've shifted the edge a little bit. I've smoothed the edge a little bit. I've feathered the edge a little bit. I've moved the radius a little bit. All less than 10. And that's going to soften the delete. And the more I delete, the softer it will get. So you can see that, kind of a slightly feathered cutout, which is helpful. All right, next, I'm going to go to this part, and I see that that's almost entirely a different layer, but there's this great shadow underneath. So what I might do before I delete and smooth is I'm going to use my eraser at 100%, 0% hardness, pretty large, and I'm going to get rid of that soft or that hard edge. Hard edges are the things that really give away compositing. So by taking a soft brush, just cutting it back, see, that's going to help blend it a lot. Now I can go to the layer with the snout, and I can take that back somewhat. That will help. So now both these combined layers have a soft transitioning edge. Now how do I kind of blend them together? Because I like the shadow from that, but I like the fur and the texture from this. So what I do is now I'm going to use that same soft eraser, but use it as a much lower opacity. And be a little bit more directive about it. That lets some of the shadow come through. It corrects some of the color. And because I'm using the tablet, the harder I press, the more coverage it will have. I want a little bit of that warmth on the outside, but not too much. And I'm only worried about these internal edges here. Okay, so big difference there. So we're using everything that we can that's useful. Okay, next. Look at these eyes. They look pretty blended in. And the ears. My only thing about the ears is that they need to be probably worked with and spot treated a little bit with dodge and burn. So I'm going to try dodging it a little bit on this side, bring out a little bit of that brightness again, because we have it on the shoulder. I can do that with the snout layer too. I'm just brightening the midtones a little bit, certain areas. With the snout layer, I actually want to sharpen it. And there is a sharpen tool that you can try. It's not my favorite. But for spot treating, like the wrinkles on the snout, it can be useful. It just increases contrast between pixels. So it doesn't give you a high, it doesn't create pixels. It just increases contrast between them. It can make it look a little grainy. So you can see that in the snout there. It starts to look a little bit fragmented from using this. But that's going to help in general make it match up with the eyes. The alternate way to go is to not use the sharpen tool, which generally degrades an image, even though it increases the contrast, and instead to soften slightly this mask, kind of bring everything to the same depth of field in the photograph. And so I can do that with the blur tool. These are new tools for us. We're going to be playing with them more later. And the blur tool I can use as a direct tool, like so. But again, that's a little dangerous. But I want to show you how it works. So it decreases contrast between pixels, so they'll look a little blurrier, whereas before they were nice and sharp. The other method, which I like a little bit better, is you make a duplicate of that layer, and then you go to filter, and this is the only filter I ever use in this class, and that's blur. No, not blur, sorry. You go filter blur, and then you want Gaussian blur, which allows you to control how much and to preview it. So we don't want very much blur at all. We just want it to kind of sink into the head a little bit. Now what's nice about that is because you made it as a duplicate, you can always play with the opacity and bring out more or less of the sharpness. I think that's about the level I want. All right, same thing with the ears. I dodged a little there. I want to burn a little bit in the ears themselves, so these shadows feel strong enough to hold up to the rest of the image. So we're spot treating lights and darks. That is too strong, and I want to do it to the midtones, and I want to do it at an exposure of less than 30. And that makes it a lot more controllable. So I'm going to burn in the shadows inside the ears, help separate it a little bit. Give it a little bit more depth. It's got plenty of light on the top, and I'll still need to cut it out cleanly. But that's helping. Then in here, kind of the shadow around the eyes, that might help with some burn as well. Help set that up. All right. So other areas that might need dodge and burn kind of spot treatments, the tail for sure. Just because it's behind, it should be burned down a bit in its midtones. Made to feel a little bit more in shadow. It's easy to do. The stomach right here can be burned down a little bit. Even burned down slightly in its highlights. Just because it's got a little bit too much contrast right there in the chest. And then we can round it down on the bottom a little bit more. Notice that when you burn midtones, it does tend to take saturation away. So if you want that back, you can use the sponge tool, but generally shadows don't have the intensity of color. And then on the arms layer, I'm going to burn the back here. And a little bit under the head. So you're just really working on all sides to make the lighting and the coloring of your creature feel consistent. And then the legs, burn those a little bit, help take away some of that overall tone of brown. That will help lead back into the tail. And then back to the head and the individual parts. I think the pig snout can use some burning right on its underside. And then in this layer, I'm going to erase a little bit more with that soft edge, low opacity eraser. This is the ear layer. Okay. So let's save the work. I might actually take the ear layer and try the sharpening tool just at the edges of these ears. Yeah, so I can really see those veins. Zoom in on that for you. Once it catches up with me. There we go. Yeah, so now you want all that focus to feel about the same. So even though the ears get out of focus as they pull away, that's okay, as long as when they get to the eyes, which is a major focal point, they feel sharpened and focused there. And if you have good reference, it can deal with all of that kind of scrutiny. So spot sharpening. Good. Now we can save it. Any kind of last thing I want to do while the layers are still separate, I want to get rid of this kind of large background stuff. It's more easy to do while they're separate layers than when they're combined. And I want to play with color things. So I think I'm going to play with the legs and adjust the color balance. These are direct adjustments under image. And I'm going to push in the midtones more blues. This might be a more, there we go, a more subtle approach. Good. And then in the highlights, maybe try a little bit of warmth. Good morning. And a little bit of green. Yeah, and that's going to work better. And then I'm going to try that with the tail as well. And now that I've got the levels worked out with dodge and burn, I want to make sure the color balance is doing everything it can to help everything work together. Put some cyan into that tail. That's about all it needs. Because I need it to feel connected. Okay, now save it, Command S. Now let's get rid of some of this big background stuff. Now before I do that, I can get rid of my sketch. Now I could just turn it off and have the grid, but what I'm going to do instead is make a new layer on top of my background sketch. So I go down to my background and I click on the little post-it note in the layer window, which is for a new layer. And then I'm going to say Edit Fill to fill the entire layer with 50% gray. Now that's going to be really helpful because it will show me any debris I have on these different layers, right? And I want to go to kind of the biggest ones first. So the arms here, a lot of